All right, here it is. So my name is Paul Andrew, and I'm a technical product manager on the Office 365 team, and I work on identity management and network performance in Office 365. And I'm joined today by Sean Bishop. Sean, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a program manager with the Azure Multi-Factor Authentication team. Came to Microsoft a little over a year ago with an acquisition of a company called PhoneFactor, which is what brought the multi-factor authentication technology to Microsoft, and happy to be here.
All right, so thank you, Sean. So today we're going to be talking about multi-factor authentication and how you can use that in Office 365. There's three parts to the talk, so three topics that we'll be talking about. First, we'll be introducing you to multi-factor authentication. What is it? Why would you want to use it? Why are people getting involved with it? And then second, how is that usable in Office 365? What have we brought into there? And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the future things that we're doing in Office 365 to better support multi-factor authentication. And then we'll spend some time talking about Microsoft Azure multi-factor authentication and what additional things you can do with different licenses or different software that's available from Microsoft Azure. So if that sounds good, we'll get into it, and we should have a good 15 minutes of time for questions at the end. I've been asked to actually, I have a list of things I have to ask you. If you have questions, please come to the microphones. If you have a cell phone, please set it to stun. And at the end, if I don't show you a QR code, please remind me, because you need to give us evals and give us feedback about whether you'd like us to come back or not. Is that it? Yep. There's free stuff? It doesn't say that here. No, it's just some other, I don't know, all sorts of other things here. All right. So we're going to talk about multi-factor authentication. But before we do, I want to just talk about a couple of very level-setting parts of Microsoft's identity management story. The first is that we have two identity databases at Microsoft. We have one which is a consumer system, and that's called the Microsoft account. It was previously called Microsoft Live ID. It was previously called Microsoft Passport. It was previously called, well, no, it had other names before that, but let's not go that far back in history. So the Microsoft account is what we use to identify consumers on Microsoft properties. And a Microsoft account is something anyone can go and sign up for. Probably everyone in this room has one or two or five, and possibly maintain some for your family members. I don't know. But they are intended as an individual account which you, as an individual, a consumer, make use of services from Microsoft. And they do have things such as your payment instruments, your credit cards, your billing history with Microsoft associated with them. So there's a lot of stuff there. There is a user agreement when you sign up, which is an agreement between you as an individual and Microsoft. And the other interesting thing about them is even though you may have a bunch of them with members of your family, you can't administer them without actually getting passwords off your family members. So there isn't a way for you to be an admin for a group of people. So I explain the Microsoft account like this because here we have the Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which is something that we first developed to use with Office 365, and it's since become available for other products. And we first developed it out of the Active Directory team, but it's a directory that as a customer, an organization, or a subscriber to a service, you buy a directory. You don't buy a user account. And so you subscribe to Office 365, you get to add users into that directory, and you get to manage those users. And you, if you're the organization or representing the organization, you have some kind of subscription or agreement with Microsoft, but your users don't. Your users have an agreement with you, maybe. That's up to you. But your users are under your control. Microsoft does not send them advertising email. We do not have an agreement with your end users. We don't own your data. It's your subscription and your directory. So it's very different to our consumer accounts. And that does mean you can administer them all as a group. You can have a global address list and some things like that. So there's some great benefits there. We avoid commingling the data between these two identity databases. We keep them separated in our data centers, and we make certain service level agreements for the organizational ID, which is the Azure Active Directory, that are different from our consumer accounts. So that's why we have these two directories. Sometimes that's inconvenient when you're actually signing in and you have to remember which identity you're using here or there. And we're working to improve that in the different properties that we have that use these identity systems. One example of that is if you have an Azure subscription, you can sign into the Azure portal with either a Microsoft account or an organizational ID. So that's a great example of how we're making that easier for people to work with these two directories that we have. So we have two directories. Today we're talking about the one on the right, the one in orange. The one in blue also has multi-factor authentication system, but it's different from what we'll be talking about today. Today is all about the organizational IDs. The second, the other introductory slide that I wanted to talk about is Office 365 and how it has 3 different identity models. And as a subscriber to Office 365, you can choose which or a mixture of these that you use. The first is cloud identity, where you just go to the Office 365 portal and you add your users there and you manage them there. And you do actually everything inside the Office 365 users and groups admin UX in the portal. The second is where you have an on-premises directory and you synchronize that up to Windows Azure Active Directory. And you do your management on-premises in your existing directory. And this is the most common one that people use. You've got this existing directory, you work with it, and you continue to do that. And as part of synchronizing that up, we synchronize password hashes so your users can sign in seamlessly with the same password in the cloud that they use on-premises. The third option is where you synchronize all your users into the cloud from on-premises. So your user directory is all there, but when they sign in, you actually have that password verified and have them put in their username and password to systems that are managed on-premises and operating on-premises. So in this model, the cloud never has any reference or access or visibility into the user's password or a derivative of the user's password, and the authentication is done by your existing domain controllers on-premises using Active Directory Federation services typically. And then a token is sent back to our cloud services that they can use to remember that the user is signed on and that this thing's okay. So we have these 3 models, and we're going to be talking about multi-factor authentication, which can be used with any of these 3 different models. There's some slight differences, but there are more differences in how you implement these and how you onboard to the service than with multi-factor auth. All right, and the last part of our intro is if you are using this federated option, then you may be using a third-party identity provider. And if you are, we have a testing and qualification program. And because there are some things that may or may not work, even though the Federation uses open standards, there are parts of that that may not work out of the box. So we test with these vendors. We do interoperability testing, and results of that testing are shown in this program that works with Office 365 Identity Program. So encourage you to take a look at that. All right. So we're going to hand over to Sean to talk a little bit about what is multi-factor authentication. Sean, you've been working on multi-factor authentication for a little while now.
A few years.
Yeah.
A few years now. Yeah. All right, so first, just we want to have a baseline out there. What is multi-factor authentication? What do we mean when we say that? So multi-factor authentication is just using 2 or more factors of authentication, which are something that you know, something that you have, or something that you are the 3 factors that you can use. So everybody here, I'm sure, has used multi-factor authentication. If you've ever been to an ATM and used your card and your PIN, you've used multi-factor authentication. Something you have, which is your card, something you know, which is your PIN. So in our case, we want we're using multi-factor authentication that uses the phone as the device that you have in your possession. So you still put in your organizational username and password, just like you always have, and then we do second factor authentication by calling or texting or sending a push notification to your registered mobile device. We have a few different options with the phone call, the apps, or the text messaging that we'll go into a little bit more detail, but that's basically how it works. So with Azure, the technology came, as I mentioned earlier in my intro, the technology came to Microsoft through the acquisition of PhoneFactor in October of 2012. So it's something that, while it's fairly new to Microsoft, it's fairly new to Office 365, it's technology that's been around for a number of years. We have lots of customers using it and out there in the enterprise in full production. So we're good to go. Back to you.
All right.
Go ahead.
So yes, and the PhoneFactor technology, it's now, I think, been rebranded Microsoft Azure Multi-Factor Authentication. All right, we both got it.
Right.
It did change a little bit, so
Right,
make sure we got
just
that
like
right.
you explained with live IDs, Microsoft accounts, we've gone through
Yes.
a couple of different names. We started out as PhoneFactor. When we first came to Microsoft, it was Windows Azure Active Authentication, then Windows Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, and now all of Azure just recently rebranded to drop the Windows name, so now it's just Microsoft Azure Multi-Factor Authentication.
All right. And we have multi-factor authentication for Office 365 included as part of Office 365 subscriptions. And so this means you can use multi-factor authentication with Office 365 just by turning it on for the users that you want to enable. It is currently not available for small business SKUs and for dedicated SKUs. Are there any dedicated customers here? All right. There's not a lot of dedicated customers, so welcome. So I'll repeat the question for the recording. The question is, do these scenarios that we're talking about today also apply to dedicated? And in fact, they do not. Our dedicated SKUs have currently a different identity management system, and it is somewhat custom depending on the dedicated customer. So they do not currently today use Azure Active Directory. Please ask your dedicated rep to get onto Azure Active Directory. It is something that we're looking at, but it is very specific to each dedicated customer. So I also wanted to talk about the small business SKUs. We have enabled multi-factor authentication all across Office 365. Our small business SKUs have a different admin UX, and that admin UX for small business is simplified and does not include multi-factor authentication. The multi-factor authentication extends what is currently available. It is optional. You don't have to use it, and nothing happens unless you explicitly go and enable a user for multi-factor authentication. So it's an opt-in thing that you can use. One thing to note, and this is more important if there are anyone transitioning from existing multi-factor authentication systems, the multi-factor authentication for Office 365 doesn't replace either an existing multi-factor authentication system you have, or in fact, if you're using Microsoft Azure multi-factor authentication, if you add the multi-factor authentication for Office 365 to your existing system that has multi-factor auth, you're going to end up probably with two second factor authentication requests, or maybe just two sets of licensing for it, depending on what you had. Specifically, if you already had Microsoft Azure multi-factor authentication and you add the multi-factor authentication for Office 365, you'll still be licensed for Microsoft Azure multi-factor authentication and still have that pay-as-you-go license there. And the reason for that is there's additional functionality with multi-factor authentication, and we don't want to turn that off for people who are using it. So we have three kinds of second factor authentication that is included with Microsoft Azure multi-factor authentication. Sorry, we're still getting used to those long names with changes in them. So we can use mobile apps. and I want to show a mobile app today, although you'll have to download it and install it yourself because I don't have a camera here to point to it. So we can use a mobile app. The app is available on Android, iPhone, or Windows Phone, and it's just called Multi-Factor Authentication. And is it, Sean, do you know if it's published by Microsoft yet, or if it's still published?
It actually says that it's published by Phone Factor.
It's still published by Phone
Factor. Yeah, we'll get that changed to Microsoft at some point, but we can't just go in and change the publisher. We have to publish it as a totally different app through Microsoft's account.
Right. The team that works on that app absolutely works for Microsoft. They're in your building, right, Sean?
That's right. That's my team.
I've talked with them over email, but I haven't seen them in the buildings yet. So those guys are really good. You can download that app and follow along through the demo with me if you like. We'll take a look at that. So it supports what we call push notification, and if you're familiar with how apps get notifications to your phone and you tap on the notification and it opens the app, that's what we mean by a push notification. The app also supports one-time passcodes. So what that means is nothing has to be sent to your phone, but you can be signing in and the sign-in will say, please enter the code, and you get the code off the phone. You don't have to have any interaction between the phone and the sign-in page for that. We also support phone calls. You can get a phone call from someone or other, I don't know who it is, a recorded voice, which will ask you to authenticate the sign-in. And when you do that, you just have to press the hash key, or you can press the pound key on your phone. You can either press one of those two keys. Is that right?
That's right. Depending if you're American or British.
Depending on if you're American or
Australian.
British. So all you have to do is you answer the phone, you press the pound key, and you're assigned straight in, and that's the phone call. We call that out of band. Sean, this is more your team's work than mine. Why do we call it out of band?
Right, so
I know it's written on the screen.
When we say out of band, we're talking about completing your second factor authentication in a separate channel from your primary authentication. So in these examples, if you're using the text messaging, which we'll talk about, well, I'll just mention it. So with text messaging, we send a one-time passcode in your text message, and you're prompted to take that OTP and type it into the browser to complete your verification. So if using that or using the one-time passcode option with the mobile app, you're putting that one-time passcode into the browser after you've entered your username and password. So that means you're putting your username, your password, and your OTP into the same channel of authentication. So that is not 100% out of band. It might be delivered out of band, but it's not 100% out of band authentication. On the other hand, if you're using the push notification with the mobile app, or if you're using the phone call authentication, you're completing your second factor of authentication through a totally separate channel and not through the browser. So you put your username and password into the browser, complete your second factor on the phone, 100% out of band.
Yep. Okay, so we have mobile apps, phone calls, or text messages that you can choose from. We have a few other options, as you'll see as we dig into the UI, which are details of these three. So here's the first part of the UI for multi-factor authentication that I wanted to show you. And this is where you select the second factor or second factors that are going to be available to you as a user. So this screen is something that is seen by the user who is signing in and who is being required to use a second factor of authentication. So they see this additional security verification screen, and it's got a tab over to the right for app passwords, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you can choose which your preferred option for your second factor is. And this little call out, that's what the menu is that shows when you hit the drop down there. So you can select one of those options, call my mobile phone, text code to my mobile phone, call my office phone, notify me through app, or show one-time code in the app. And whichever of those you select, the sign-in system will attempt to ask you about that and initiate that immediately after you have entered your account password correctly. So you put in your username, you put in your account password, you hit go, and then this is what happens. However, you can have multiple options for this second factor. So, for example, if you leave your cell phone at home, and your cell phone is how you've enabled your second factor of authentication, and you're in the office and you need to sign in, you need to use your second factor, it's at home, you have the option of selecting multiple of these with the little tick boxes. You can add your office phone or an alternate phone there. So even though the second factor is initiated on one particular factor, you can change that about.
And even during the course of the authentication, when you first sign in, it's going to try to call your default method of authentication. So if that was your cell phone, it's going to try to ring your phone that you've left at home. But then you'll see a hyperlink there that says other verification options. So you can just click on that, select another option that will work for you at that time, and use it, and then you're in.
And this down the bottom, mobile app, where it's got that configure button, I'm going to walk you through that in just a moment. So we'll take a look at that. So the second one here to look at is app passwords. And this is something that we use because the current Office client applications, most of them have fixed login screens, which are part of the client application. And so those login screens, they come up and they ask for your username and password. And then they expect to have a response of whether you're able to be signed in or not. And this mechanism does not facilitate us being able to have a second factor of authentication because of the way that they're built. And they're difficult to update. We are working on updating those, and we'll have some updates out by the end of this year for the Office clients. But because they are not updated, and certainly people will always have old clients, well, at least for some long period of time, it'll be a while before we get rid of all the old cell phones that have built-in mail clients that don't support multi-factor authentication. So there will for many years be old clients out there that don't do multi-factor auth. And so we have this alternative that is an option that actually a tenant administrator can turn this off for your tenant, but there's an option to have which is called app passwords. And an app password is not a second factor. It is the same as something. However, it isn't a password the user gets to select. It is chosen by the system. You can see an example of one there. The password starting with NJN is an app password. It is 16 characters long if you want to count those characters, which is the maximum number of characters that we can use for our password hashes. And it's obviously randomly generated. They're really hard to remember. They're harder to crack than a user password. I won't say they're more secure, but they are certainly more likely that, what's the right word for this, Sean?
It's just, the main thing is because you only see them once, so you'll copy and paste them into your apps right at that time when you generate them, or type them into your mobile apps right at that time, and then you never see the password again. So something that you shouldn't write down, but that you don't want to remember, and just with the length and the randomness of the characters, that provides a sufficient entropy to make it difficult to crack.
I could write it down on a Post-it note though, right?
No.
I can't?
No.
Oh. So you can't write them down?
Well, I can't stop you, but that would be a bad security practice. Please don't.
You can't write them down because actually you'll get to about 10 characters and then you'll go, this is too hard, and then you'll stop. We've tested this with people. So they offer you a way of reducing the issues with user-selected passwords. User-selected passwords are usually too short. They're usually based on words. You can have up to 40 of these because they're hard to remember. You can just go create another one. And all of the app passwords that you've created will be able to be used by Office client applications for authenticating you instead of the account password. So you don't put in your account password, your normal password, you just put in the app password there. And you can have a little tag by them. You can see two up here, Link and Outlook, with these tags so that you can remember what you use them for. You can delete them if either they're no longer working for you, you can't remember them, or the app is using a different one.
And we recommend actually using a different app password per device, so that way if you lose that device, then you can go and just revoke the password for that device, and you don't have to go through and change your passwords on all your other devices.
Yep. All right, so that's what app passwords are. Now let's take a look at how you set this up. So I'll switch over to my other machine. All right, so here's Office 365 Admin Center, and I'm going to go into users and groups. And I've just got a tenant here with some demo users in, and I'm going to pick on this guy, Aaron Andrew, and I'm going to set him up for multi-factor authentication, and then I'm going to walk through what Aaron sees and what he has to do because he's been enabled for that. So first I'm going to go into this, this thing here, set multi-factor authentication requirements, and click Setup, which switches to another screen that looks very much like the previous one, but it's specifically for configuring multi-factor authentication. So we'll select Aaron here, and all I have to do is go and select Enable. You can see there's also a few user settings I can set. I can delete his app password. And so I'm just going to go. You can see there's a couple of documentation links if you're new to multi-factor authentication, so you can read about it, make sure you know what's going to happen. All right, so he's been enabled. You can see that he's enabled, some users are disabled, and some users are enforced. What enabled means is it's an intermediary step between which the next time Aaron signs on to a browser-based application, this is Outlook Web Access or SharePoint Online or the Office 365 portal, he's going to be required to what we call proof up. So he's going to be required to submit his second factor of authentication that he'll have to use after that. You don't, as an administrator, you don't hand the person their phone or do this in person. It's something the user does. They proof up themselves when they're enabled. Now, while Aaron is still enabled, all his Office client applications will still work and he won't have to use app passwords. The reason we do this is if we enforce multi-factor authentication immediately, what's the first thing that's going to happen? Aaron's Outlook anymore. Is my mic dodgy?
It cuts out a little bit.
Yeah. Perhaps I speak into it. So you won't be able to sign in, and he's going to call help desk, or maybe he's just going to complain to his friends or something. So we don't do that until he's signed on to the browser and gone through that. You can specifically go and say, hey, I'm going to enforce you directly if that's something that you want to do. Okay, so we've enabled Aaron, and that's all we need to do here. I'm going to go over to another browser. You can see it in another browser because it's in private, so it's got different cookies. And we'll sign on to Portal Microsoft Online as Aaron. All right, so first time I sign in as Aaron. So it tells me that my admin has required you to set up this account for additional security verification, and I have the option to set it up now. I don't have any other option here. I can't sign in without doing this. So let's go ahead and set this up. So I have signed on with my account password. At this point, I'm trusted. I didn't have to attach a second factor, but I have to add my second factor now. So I'm going to select the mobile app. You can see I can also choose a phone, either a mobile or an Office phone. All right, I'm going to choose the mobile app just because I like it. If everyone installed that Multi-Factor Auth app, I don't expect you to see that there. This is just an icon for the app that I'm going to be using. So I'll start it up, and I don't need my battery. I'm going to hit plus on this for a new account and hit the QR button, and then I'll just point my camera at the screen here, and it finds a code and a URL from that. And it says here, if the app displays a 6-digit code, you are done. So I've got a 6-digit code, so I am done. And then it's checking activation status with the phone right now. Mobile app has been configured. And so now my mobile app has a code on here that it can use to authenticate for that second factor. And we're going to verify it now. So it's popped up, and it's asked me to verify or cancel, so I'm going to hit verify, and we're done. Okay, so now that I've verified, verification successful, hit next to continue, and we're ready to go. So that's all you have to do to proof up there. It is going to ask me also for my mobile number, which of course is 425-555-1234. So I'm going to put that in. It's just going to ask me for my mobile phone number just in case I lose access to my app, it gets uninstalled or something, that I can still log in. So it wants to get that extra number there, and I can use that as an alternate for my backup. All right, and now that I'm actually set up, Aaron is ready to go. He can use multi-factor authentication, and at this point, his Office client applications will stop working. The reason they'll stop working is because he's enforced for multi-factor authentication, and an account password alone is no longer sufficient to log in. So Office client apps will not work at this point. And now we're asked, it says your current password will now only work in the browser. And so we're encouraged to generate an app password. Let's go ahead and do that. Here's an app password, which you can use to log on to Aaron's account if you're so inclined. And so I can copy that to the clipboard, and I can paste that in to Office client applications to log in instead of using the client app that they come with. So why don't we try that? I am signed into Link here. I'm going to sign out real quick. I'm going to delete my sign-in info. All right, so we're going to hit sign in. I'm going to copy that password to the clipboard. Link's going to try to do single sign-in first, so it's going to try my local account that I just deleted the sign-in info for. It should fail any moment because my local account doesn't have the user principal name of rna@paul20.onmicrosoft.com. Normally you wouldn't see this because you would be using the same account that you signed into the PC. Come on. Well, shall I try again?
I guess so. We need some need a button we can click and have some Jeopardy music playing.
Yeah. Do you know any good jokes about Link? Well, it's obviously Link that's not working. Okay, we'll try again. I don't know why this is not working. I've been having some problems with my PC.
Not responding.
Yeah. All right, so what I should see here is I should see the username password dialog come up. I can hit paste to paste in my app password, and that is it. I'll then be signed in with Link. If I tried my account password, I wouldn't get any further. All right, so let's switch back, and we will carry on. Oh, I want to show you how the user can change their second factor. Should we take a look at that?
Sure.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. So my user's done here. Let's go ahead and we've finished now, and so it's signing the user in. And at this point, you're required to use a second factor. I heard a ding dong here, which means I've had an app I'm asked to verify. So I'll hit verify here. And then as soon as I hit verify, I'm allowed to sign in. Whoever's on the phone, could you please silence it? Okay, so we're signed in here, and then as Aaron, I can go into the settings for Aaron, which is the right one. This one. Aaron's options. And I hit the wrong one, didn't I?
Yeah, Office 365 settings. Right?
Yeah. So I go into Office 365 settings, and then I'm going to go down here under password to additional security verification. And this gives me a link that I can go to update my second factor. And here is the screen that we saw when we first started looking at this UI. It's this additional security verification screen. Here's my preferred option, which of course I can change to any one of those. And I can go in and add different phone numbers. If I select country code, etc. I have to do that actually in my other part of my setup. So we can go in and add a phone number. And so this is how you add other options, and you can also go in and change your app passwords in here. You can see my initial app password. I can create another one. Maybe I'll create one for Outlook. There's another password. and I can go ahead and delete those passwords. And there we go. All right. So we looked at how the admin enables and enforces users for multi-factor authentication, and we looked at how the user signs in, does their proof up, and then how they can change their second factor later on. The user can't opt out of multi-factor authentication. That they would have to talk with their admin about that. All right, so there's a couple of just specific things related to use of multi-factor authentication with Office 365. The first is talking about federated users. Remember that, that diagram that we showed that had cloud identity, synchronized identity, and federated identity? Well, you can use multi-factor authentication on users in any of these identity models. So I did it with a cloud identity. Aaron is a cloud identity that is managed on the cloud. But I could have done that with a synchronized identity or a federated identity. Now, one thing that is interesting, if you have a multi-factor authentication provider on premises, maybe it's attached to ADFS, or maybe it's the Microsoft Azure multi-factor authentication server that you're running on premises. If you enable the cloud multi-factor authentication as well as an on-premises one, you want to watch out that you don't have 2 second factors popping up and prompting the users. We've had some customers who've experienced this, and you just have to make sure that you turn one or the other of them off.
Or at least set the ADFS policies such that it would return the appropriate token that indicates the second factor was already done, so that the cloud sees that and doesn't try to do it again. Great.
Yep. So let's talk about hybrid for a second. Sean, can you tell us, I'll put you on the spot here, about some of the scenarios where you've seen people using hybrid, where multi-factor is in the cloud and on premises, if it's different like that?
Yeah, we've got different options, and we're going to show a diagram here in a little bit to show the architecture of how it all fits together. But so we have options. If you're using the full Azure multi-factor authentication, you can use the multi-factor authentication server on premises to secure not only ADFS, but other things like VPN. If you're using on-premises Exchange, you can secure OWA or SharePoint, any Citrix, any kind of, a lot of different remote access applications you run on premises, you can secure with that. And then the things that you use to sign into the cloud, whether you're securing Office 365 or you're securing access to third-party SaaS applications, that when you're using your Azure Active Directory credentials to sign into those, then that can all be protected with the cloud version of the multi-factor authentication.
PowerShell, the last thing to call out, no multi-factor authentication for PowerShell. We recommend that you have a service account in your admin group that is used specifically when PowerShell is required. And that if your administrators are using multi-factor authentication, that they use those accounts that are multi-factor authentication secured for other operations. But when they have to do PowerShell work, they'll have to use a service account. All right, so the next part of the talk is some of the futures of Office clients that we have. And we have announced that we're working on the Office clients, the Office 2013 clients, to support multi-factor authentication. And this specifically will mean that you won't have to use @passwords again. Yeah, so my poor demo, you can see my link client has come up and is asking me for my password. It's timed out on that auth that it was trying to do with my built-in account. I deleted that @password, so I can't do the sign-in, but I did want to show you that Link is doing the right thing there, and that would sign into Aaron's account. So no more need for @passwords in these updated clients. And this is in all of the Office clients. We're doing this work. There are other clients which will also be enabled over time, mobile apps, mobile email clients, and those sorts of things. These new clients will also be able to support a couple of other things, because what we're enabling in those clients is not specifically for multi-factor authentication. It's to enable passive auth models or auth models where a browser sign-in form is shown by the identity provider. where the password is entered directly into a form owned by the identity provider rather than being captured by the client and forwarded on. So because that browser page is being shown by the identity provider, it can potentially show other information on that page. It could tell you your password is about to expire. It could ask you for a capture if it thinks you're doing something nefarious and not the real user entering the password. And it enables us to support federation providers that use the SAML protocol directly. Those providers do not have the active authentication models that are required for our Office clients right now. It also enables us to support the US DoD Common Access Card, US Federal Personal Identity Verification Card, which have separate identity providers as well. So I have a video of a prototype to show you. I don't have the real clients yet, but I have a video of a prototype. And what this video shows is configuring a new account in Outlook and using multi-factor authentication to identify yourself to exchange online. So we'll watch the video. Entering the username, email address here. Hitting the next button. And here you can see a browser form which has come from Azure Active Directory. And this sign-in form, which is an existing Azure Active Directory sign-in form. Here's the number that's been texted to the user as a second factor that they've put in. And now the user's signed in, and they're successfully logged in, and they're able to set up their Outlook account. All right, so this is built on top of Active Directory Authentication Library. If you've been to some of the Exchange sessions, there's an Exchange session that's been here this week, which talks about the new OAuth protocol that Exchange is using, and this is built on top of that as well. So there's some new advances to the way Outlook talks to Exchange and the way Outlook talks here to Microsoft Azure Active Directory. So Office uses OAuth to connect and to get the information required to show that browser-based sign-in form from the identity provider. And then a token is issued by the identity provider which enables Outlook to authenticate as the user during the duration that token lives. So here's the flow. Office makes a call to the service. The service says, hey, you're not authenticated. Then Office uses the Active Directory Authentication Library to open the login page using the default system web browser. And that would be the Trident or IE browser on Windows or the Safari browser on Mac. And then the password is validated by the federated identity provider and sent back to Azure Active Directory. All right, so the third part of our agenda is we've been talking primarily about multi-factor authentication for Office 365. So I want to hand over, and Sean's going to talk a bit more about how Microsoft Azure multi-factor authentication is different, what additional things it has.
All right, so what we've been talking about up till now is everything that's included with your Office 365 subscriptions. And we also have that basically the same features that are in the Azure Management Portal for Azure administrators, where it's included. You can enable your admins for multi-factor authentication in your Azure portal, so that when they access those resources, they can do it securely. What we're going to be talking about now is the box that's here on the right, which is the Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, which has some additional features that's not included in what you get with your Office subscriptions. So we'll go through some of those details here. So here you can see the differences of what's included with Office and what's not. So you can enable and enforce your users. You can use app passwords. You can use the phone call, the SMS, and the mobile app authentications. You can do all that with Office. With Office, you hear default greetings. So if you're doing the phone call, You'll receive the phone call, you'll answer, and it'll say, this is the Microsoft verification system. Please press the pound key to complete your verification. Those are default greetings that your users will hear if you're using the version that's included with Office. Something new that will be coming shortly is a Remember Me feature, so that you can, after you complete a second factor authentication, you can check a box to say, hey, remember my PC, remember my device, and it'll remember you for a period of time. So your admin will configure how long that period of time is, but then when you sign in from that particular device, going forward during that period of time, you won't have to do multi-factor again. So you don't have to do multi-factor every single time you sign in like you do today. So that'll be coming. Your admin will configure whether that lasts for a week, a couple weeks, 60 days. They'll have some flexibility on how long those cookies will last. They'll have the ability to revoke the cookies, or you will too, if you need to expire it, if something happens, you need to make sure that you do a multi-factor authentication. And of course, if you open up a different browser on the device or just go to a different device and sign in, then you'll have to do MFA from that device as well. All right, so now some features that aren't included in Office, or with the multi-factor that you get with Office 365. The ability to customize the greetings. So with the full Microsoft Azure multi-factor authentication, you can record your own greetings, you can upload those to our portal, and then your users can hear your messages instead of the Microsoft messages. So you can use your own voice talent, you can have it say your company's name, make it very specific to how you're using it. We also have a feature called Fraud Alert, which is a security feature. If you have the full version, you have the Fraud Alert enabled, then when your users sign in, they'll hear a message that asks them to press the pound key to complete their authentication. It'll say, if you're not attempting to sign in right now, press £0 to report fraud. What that does is it alerts your administrator that you've reported fraud so that they can take action, but it also blocks your account so that any sign-ins from that point forward are automatically denied until the administrator can figure out what's going on, get your password changed, and then they can unblock you and you can start authenticating again. So that way, if you receive a random phone call out of the blue, you can take action proactively and say, whoa, I'm not signing in right now. That means somebody else has used my credentials. That's a bad thing. Let's take care of it. Event confirmation, just a feature that's mostly used by our banking customers where we can do specific transactional verifications. We have a portal that you can log into. That's where you upload your voice greetings if you want to customize those. You can customize the caller ID phone number that appears when you receive the phone calls. We have reports there that you can run. You can see the authentications, the multi-factor authentications that have been done for your users, who authenticated, when they authenticated, what phone number was used, which method of authentication they used, and you can download those reports to CSV, so you have access to all that data for security and for audit purposes. If you just have a user that you want to block them from doing two-factor, you can block them, you can unblock them. We have a feature called one-time bypass, so you can go in and enable a bypass for a user. So maybe they left their phone at home and they're not at the office, they don't have any access to any of their backup methods. They can call an admin. An admin can initiate a bypass, and then they'll have a window of time. The default is 5 minutes, but it's configurable. So then that user could then sign in within that 5-minute window without the second factor authentication. Caller ID I'd mentioned. And then if you want to use the MFA server on premises, so you want to secure ADFS instead of doing it in the cloud, and because you're going to secure VPN and other things as well, you can do all that with Azure multi-factor authentication. And then we also have SDKs that you can use. So those are some of the differences with when you upgrade and you pay for the additional features. Those are the additional features that you get. I forgot IP whitelist. That's a new feature that's in public preview that's in Azure Multi-Factor. That allows you to set up whitelists for your corporate network so that when your users are signing in from inside the network, they don't have to do multi-factor. But if they're signing in from outside the network, then they're required to do multi-factor. So that's a nice feature. Yeah. All right, so this is the architecture, how the Azure Multi-Factor Authentication fits together. If you're using the multi-factor server on premises, you can use it to secure things using standard protocols. So you can use Radius or LDAP if you're securing something like VPN or Citrix, VMware View. Lots of different things can authenticate via Radius or LDAP. So you can just point those things at the multi-factor authentication server. It receives the authentication request from that system. It validates your user's primary credentials against your on-premises Active Directory, and then does the two-factor authentication and returns a response to that system. We also have IIS plugins, so you can hook into IIS websites like on-premises OWA, SharePoint, or other IIS websites so that we can intercept the login request as it comes into the web server, add the two-factor authentication to that login flow. And then we can also secure terminal services. In all those cases, the multi-factor authentication is connecting out to our cloud service to request the multi-factor authentication to occur. And it's our cloud service that's actually placing the phone call, text message, or doing the mobile app notification. So then you can, if you're federating, if you're securing cloud apps and you're federating, then we can also hook into the system that you're federating. If you're using ADFS, if you're using version 2, you haven't upgraded yet, then we can use our IIS plugins to secure that. If you're on the latest version, then we have an ADFS adapter that you can hook in and configure that to use multi-factor with the MFA server. And then this is the integration where we're hooked in with Azure Active Directory. So whether you're using the MFA for Office 365 or the Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, we're integrated there. And as Paul showed earlier, that's where you can enable your users and perform multi-factor. And then lastly is we have SDKs available so that you can integrate directly into your own applications, where your applications are doing their own primary authentication, and then they're simply calling our service to request two-factor authentication. In that case, you're passing the phone number, you're passing the authentication method, and requesting the multi-factor. We do it for you and give you back the result. All right, so now we can do a demo. We get the question like, hey, if I'm an Office subscriber already, I've already got an Azure Active Directory tenant, but I don't have an Azure subscription. How do I then start, if I want to do those extra features, if I want to upgrade to Azure Multi-Factor Authentication so I can customize my greetings and all that goodness that I just talked about, how do I do that? So we're going to go through that. The easiest way is to first just sign into the portal, microsoftonline.com, with an administrator account that's in your directory. That's what I've done here. So I'm signed in with an administrator account. Let me refresh that and make sure that's not stale. Okay, that's still good. So now that I'm signed in with that account, I'm just going to go to azure.microsoft.com. And here you can see try it for free. So I'm going to try Azure. And so here now you can try it out now. You can click buy now and not have the free month, but hey, might as well take advantage of the free month, right? So try it now.
Just a little advertisement there to try and get them to avoid the free month.
No, I won't. Go ahead. We'd love them to take advantage of the free month. All right, so now, okay, so my credentials are a little stale because I entered them a little while ago, so I got to enter my password again. If I can type it correctly. All right, so now that I'm signing in with an organizational account that's already in an Azure directory, I can now fill out this form, put in my contact email, my company name. Your directory will show up in Azure with this name that you put in. You have to put in you have to do a phone verification, and then it'll prompt you to put in payment information. I know you guys really want me to all put in my credit card number here on the screen so you can take a picture of it, and but I'm not going to do that. Sorry. So I'm going to skip that step. But so you would put in your payment information. Of course, you have to agree to the terms. You click sign up, and then you'll have an Azure subscription. So let me sign out of here, and I'll sign in with a different account that I just did this on. Actually, I can go to my account. Start off with usage and billing. It thought I was wanting to use a Microsoft account. I need to make sure that I'm using an organizational account. Okay, So if I had just finished going through that trial sign-up process, this is the screen that I would now see. So now you can see this is the subscription that I've got. It's called Free Trial. I can click on that subscription so I can see some details. So here you can see when you sign up for the 30-day subscription, it gives you a $200 credit. So you can play with other Azure services. You can set up virtual machines and websites. And when you enable the multi-factor authentication, any charges for that are going to be decremented against this credit during your first month. Now, before the end of the month, you'll want to come in here and do the upgrade so that you're on a pay-as-you-go subscription. Or you can talk to the appropriate people and get this all set up through your enterprise agreement with an Azure commitment, all that stuff. But what I want to show you is so that on the subscription page, you can come down here so you can update your payment method if you want to have it charged to a different credit card. You can download usage details. So everything that you're being billed for in Azure, you can go into the usage details and see day by day what those details are that you're being billed for. Support, you can edit your subscription details. Here you can see I can change my name to not say free trial if I wanted to say something else. You can see who the service administrator is. You can change the service administrator if you need to do that. You can change your address. You can cancel your subscription. All right, but now we'll go into the portal. This is the Azure Management Portal. This is where you access Azure services. So here's where, like, if I wanted to set up a virtual machine, I could do that. But what we're interested in is the Active Directory section. So I'll go down here to Active Directory. I can see any directories that I'm a member of. I've done some things this morning to put my account into a couple of different directories. So I can see a couple of those. But the one that's default for this subscription is the one that I signed up with, which is this Microsoft 116 directory. So if I go into that directory, just like through the Office portal, I can see all my users that exist in that directory, so I can edit their information, their phone number, address. So I can play with my users here. I can add new users here. So a lot of the same functionality here as far as users go that you can do both here and in the Office portal. But now what I really care about is I want to use the multi-factor authentication. So we have this tab here, Multi-Factor Auth Providers, and I'm going to create a new multi-factor auth provider. So I'm just going to give it a name. And then I can choose a usage model. This controls how I get billed for the service. So I can either choose to pay per enabled user or per authentication. So all my users that are in the enabled or enforced state, I'm paying for those on a monthly basis. Or if I'm per authentication, every single authentication request that comes into our backend cloud service, then you're going to pay for that authentication. So I'll just leave this per enabled user. That's typically what you do for employee-facing applications for enterprises. Typically, if it's a consumer-facing application that you want to secure, then you would use the per authentication because you have a large group of users that authenticate here regularly. But for enterprises, it's typically per enabled user. So now here, I can have the multi-factor authentication provider standalone and not link it to a directory. I would maybe do that if I'm only going to plan to download and use the multi-factor authentication server on premises. But otherwise, if I want to be able to use the cloud authentication, or if I want to enable users both in the cloud and on premises, I definitely want to link it to the directory. Because when we do billing, we'll look at the number of users that are enabled in your Azure Active Directory. We look at the number of users enabled in your multi-factor server on premises. And we're only going to charge you for whichever of those is higher. So we won't double bill you if you have users enabled in both places. So I'll go ahead and link this to my current directory. A couple warnings here. You can't change this without deleting and recreating the provider later. And also, a note is that if I'm doing this, as soon as I do this, any users that I've previously enabled or enforced for multi-factor authentication, as Paul showed you earlier, then you're going to start paying for those users now. So I create that. And that's it. Now I'm using Azure Multi-Factor Authentication. I have access to all the advanced features. So to access the advanced features, I can highlight this multi-factor provider. I click Manage. So now I have access to the Multi-Factor Authentication Management Portal where I can configure those advanced features. So here where I can go in and I configure my account, I can say, hey, I want to change the caller ID phone number that appears. I want to, I want to use the fraud alert. That's a great security feature, so I want to do that. You can go into voice messages here. New voice message. You can, here you can manage sound files, and you can upload your own greetings and then tie those greetings to the different greetings that we have available here. So your users hear your custom greetings instead of the Microsoft default greetings. And you can go into usage. We have different usage reports you can run here. So you can click user details. You can run the reports. I don't think I've even done multi-factor with this tenant yet, so I don't have anything to show. But then you can see all the authentications that have been done over a period of time. So like if I wanted to run the report, I can select the date range that I want to see in the report. I can filter the report to see just specific users or just specific phone numbers, just the successful or the denied authentications. If I want to, I can filter it down to specific types of authentications. Like if I want to just see radius authentications that were done on premises, I can filter my reports on that. And then what I want to see in my reports, and I run it, and then I'm able to see those reports. I can download them in a CSV format and have access to all that goodness. This is also the portal where you can block users or unblock them. You can do a one-time bypass to give them access within a period of time. And if a user does use the fraud feature and they report fraud, then the way you unblock them after you've changed their password and figured out what's going on, you come in here, you run the fraud alert report, and you would see them listed here, and in the action column would be an option to unblock them. So you just click unblock, and now they're ready to go again, and they're happy and can sign into your applications again. All right, so that's it for the demo. Let's wrap it up.
All right. So let's talk about what we talked about. So we talked about multi-factor authentication for Office 365, what's now included in Office 365 subscriptions. And we showed you the UX, how you do that, what you can do in Office 365. We talked about the updated Office clients that I'm eagerly awaiting. It'd be great to see those.
Those will be awesome, because app passwords are kind of a pain in the butt. So
yeah.
That'll be a fantastic
Passwords
feature.
are better than user accounts. They're a bit more secure, right? But
right.
Yeah, they are hard to use.
Yeah.
And then we talked about how you can have a tenant that's in Office 365 and connect your directory into an Azure subscription that Sean just walked us through. And we looked at some of those additional features in Azure Multi-Factor Authentication. Hey, we have, looks like about 12 minutes still to go that we can take questions at the mics. So I'd love to do that. We have a few related contents. Sean will also be available at the booths.
Yeah, I'm at in the Windows Azure Identity and Access Management booth. This last breakout session here, PCIT B334, that I'm giving that tomorrow with Nasos Padakis. So we'll go into a deeper dive on how to configure the multi-factor authentication both in the cloud and on premises. So a little bit overlap with the things we did today, but definitely a lot more detail.
All right, so thanks everyone for coming. We really appreciate you being here and listening to us. And please do fill out an eval, and we'll take questions.
And if you stop by the Azure booth, they're also doing a Callaway giveaway. You can just put in your first name, last name, email address, and sign up to win a set of Callaway golf clubs or a Callaway driver, Big Bertha driver. So take advantage of that too. Question?
So Office 365, multi-factor authentication, the Remember Me feature,
yeah.
What does June preview mean? We have a lot of people coming from a competitor that are used to that, Remember Me. And we're in the government cloud also, so do you know when that will be rolled up to the government cloud?
Yeah, I don't have a more specific date, which is why we left it pretty vague as June. This is something that we're still working on, but we felt it was close enough that we could go ahead and announce it. So it'll be coming within the next 4 to 6 weeks.
But preview means what? I mean,
so public preview means that it's available for everybody. It'll have a tag on it that says preview, but it'll be fully functional. That gives us the ability to, it just gives us, it's kind of a disclaimer that allows us to put that tag on it that says, hey, it might change a little bit before it's generally available when we take the preview tag off, but it's available for everybody to use that has the Azure multi-factor authentication.
Okay, so please get it to the government cloud.
Yeah, so you don't have to do any special signups or anything. It'll just be there and you can start using it.
And one over on the other side, please.
Hi. When The multi-tenant and dedicated go through convergence. Will these features be available for the dedicated cloud?
The convergence from dedicated and multi-tenant is a project that we don't have details on, and it is being managed specifically with each dedicated customer. So I know you have one of those, but I don't know the details for what's being planned for your tenant. You would want to talk to the Microsoft account reps that you work with on dedicated about that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So,
She's gone. Over here.
so this is a little bit off topic, but I have a lot of customers that created their live IDs with their company email address, and then they signed up for OneDrive or something else. Then their company's ported to Office 365, and they're getting a lot of confusion when they log in. They don't know whether they're going to get their Office 365 OneDrive or their live OneDrive. Is there a fix for that?
The answer to that is they're going to get the OneDrive that they use the sign-in page for. So each service, OneDrive for Business and OneDrive Consumer, has a different sign-in page, and they are different. Unfortunately, there's definitely an education issue to explain that to users when they are using the same email address for both an organizational ID and a Microsoft account. But education is the best way to resolve that. Typically, I wouldn't recommend you have them sign up for different Microsoft accounts to get around that, but focus on educating them about the different Microsoft account and organizational account, and OneDrive for consumer with Microsoft account and OneDrive for business with organizational account.
Got it. Thank you.
You mentioned something about using a different app password for every device, or creating one for each device. How do you do that?
So, Paul showed you that once you're signed in, you can click your name and go into Office 365 settings, and the additional security verification. So that's where you can go back and you can change your phone number, enroll other phone numbers or switch your method of authentication. There was also the tab there that said app passwords. So you just go into there. That's where you can delete your existing app passwords or create additional app passwords. So
But how do you do that per device, like so that password only works?
Oh, so just when you create it and it's visible,
yep.
So if you're on your laptop and you've got Outlook and Link both on there, then copy that password both in for Outlook and for Link before you close the window where you don't see the app password anymore. So you'd have to change it for all of your applications on that device at the same time, while it's still visible, because once you move on, you don't ever see it again.
Gotcha.
With the Office 365 version of multi-factor authentication, can you automate that initial user sign-up? So if I want to bring over 1,000 users or whatever onto Office 365, I don't want them all initially setting up, going through all the pages, particularly if I had like their mobile phone number already in Active Directory. Is there any sort of automation there for the user sign-up?
No, there's not.
Okay.
So users have to go through that, even if the number's pre-populated. When they click Set It Up Now, then they might see the phone number already populated there. But because we don't have a default method configured for them yet, and we don't have a. Well, I guess you can do it through PowerShell. I guess is the answer. So
okay.
Can you do the whole proof up?
Yeah.
Let me think.
I think the question you're asking is we're saying. When they're first enabled, they will see the proof up, but their cell phone number can already be in there. Their default method will be cell phone, so they're just having to go next, next, next.
Okay.
They're not going to have any app passwords, but you'd like them to not even have to do that. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, but basically I'm thinking day one users, particularly people coming over from Lotus Notes or something like that. I don't want them to go through the rigmarole of proofing up, then figuring out password, posting that into Outlook. Day one users, you want them just to sign in, basically. If we're going to turn on MFA, I can't get them to sign in with Active Directory credentials.
Yeah,
so
unfortunately, there's not a way to automate that today. They do have to. It's a one-time setup, but they do have to go through it the one time.
all right,
So
thanks.
you can do the enablement and the enforcement processes through PowerShell, but the user has to go through the one-time setup.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. So for the app password active sync, so if the user's setting up their email on their phone, how would that work?
So it's really just this, it's really the same thing. You generate your app password. It's just that because you can't copy and paste from one machine to your mobile device, then you have to pull it out and type in the code.
Okay, so they would get a prompt back saying type in.
Yeah, so you just go into your settings, and instead of putting your organizational password, you change that and put in your app password and save it, and it would work.
Okay.
Because otherwise, once you're enforced,
Right.
I mean, there's always a little bit of caching time there. Like, you know, when your password expires, it might take a little while for your device to actually pop up and say, hey, I can't connect. So it'd be the same thing there. That once you're enforced, that once that cache token is expired, it'd pop up and say, hey, I can't connect. And in that case, you'd have to use an app password to type in instead of your organizational password in order for it to connect successfully.
Okay, cool.
Is there password policies around the app password? So for expiring normal user passwords every 90 days or whatever, is an app password good forever?
It's good forever at this point, yeah. There's no policy to have them expire. Some reasons for that are just that, unlike your regular password, it's not something that you know. It's not something you hopefully have written down, and it's not something you're typing in all the time. It's just there and is used. But yeah, we don't have expirations today.
Hey, that looks like all our questions. Thanks again, everyone, for coming along. Really appreciate it. Yeah, please go to that Sean's session tomorrow. It'd be great. We'll learn more about it. It doesn't say that here. No, it's just some other, I don't know, all sorts of other things here. All right. So we're going to talk about multi-factor authentication. But before we do, I want to just talk about a couple of very level-setting parts of Microsoft's identity management story. The first is that we have two identity databases at Microsoft. We have one which is a consumer system, and that's called the Microsoft account. It was previously called Microsoft Live ID. It was previously called Microsoft Passport. It was previously called, well, no, it had other names before that, but let's not go that far back in history. So the Microsoft account is what we use to identify consumers on Microsoft properties. And a Microsoft account is something anyone can go and sign up for. Probably everyone in this room has one or two or five, and possibly maintain some for your family members. I don't know. But they are intended as an individual account which you as an individual, a consumer, make use of services from Microsoft. And they do have things such as your payment instruments, your credit cards, your billing history with Microsoft associated with them. So there's a lot of stuff there. There is a user agreement when you sign up, which is an agreement between you as an individual and Microsoft. The other interesting thing about them is even though you may have a bunch of them with members of your family, you can't administer them without actually getting passwords off your family members. So there isn't a way for you to be an admin for a group of people. So I explain the Microsoft account like this because here we have the Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which is something that we first developed to use with Office 365, and it's since become available for other products. And we first developed it out of the Active Directory team, but it's a directory that as a customer, an organization, or a subscriber to a service, you buy a directory. You don't buy a user account. And so you subscribe to Office Cloud Identity, where you just go to the Office 365 portal and you add your users there and you manage them there. And you do actually everything inside the Office 365 users and groups admin UX in the portal. The second is where you have an on-premises directory and you synchronize that up to Windows Azure Active Directory. And you do your management on-premises in your existing directory. And this is the most common one that people use. You've got this existing directory, you work with it, and you continue to do that. And as part of synchronizing that up, we synchronize password hashes so your users can sign in seamlessly with the same password in the cloud that they use on premises. The third option is where you synchronize all your users into the cloud from on premises. So your user directory is all there, but when they sign in, you actually have that password verified and have them put in their username and password to systems that are managed on premises and operating on premises. So in this model, the cloud never has any reference or access or visibility into the user's password or a derivative of the user's password, and the authentication is done by your existing domain controllers on premises using Active Directory Federation services typically. and then a token is sent back to our cloud services that they can use to remember that the user is signed on and that this thing's okay. So we have these three models, and we're going to be talking about multi-factor authentication, which can be used with any of these three different models. There's some slight differences, but there are more differences in how you implement these and how you onboard to the service than with multi-factor auth. All right, and the last part of our intro is if you are using this federated option, then you may be using a third-party identity provider. And if you are, we have a testing and qualification program. Because there are some things that may or may not work, even though the Federation uses open standards, there are parts of that that may not work out of the box. So we test with these vendors. We do interoperability testing. And results of that testing are shown in this program that works with Office 365 Identity Program. So encourage you to take a look at that. All right. So we're going to hand over to Sean to talk a little bit about what is multi-factor authentication. Sean, you've been working on multi-factor authentication for a little while now.
A few years.
Yeah.
A few years now. Yeah. All right, so first, just we want to have a baseline out there. What is multi-factor authentication? What do we mean when we say that? So multi-factor authentication is just using two or more factors of authentication, which are something that you know, something that you have, or something that you are the three factors that you can use. So everybody here, I'm sure, has used multi-factor authentication. If you've ever been to an ATM and used your card and your PIN, you've used multi-factor authentication. Something you have, which is your card, something you know, which is your PIN. So in our case, we want we're using multi-factor authentication that uses the phone as the device that you have in your possession. So you still put in your organizational username and password, just like you always have, and then we do second factor authentication by calling or texting or sending a push notification to your registered mobile device. We have a few different options with the phone call, the apps, or the text messaging that we'll go into a little bit more detail, but that's basically how it works. So with Azure, the technology came, as I mentioned earlier in my intro, the technology came to Microsoft through the acquisition of PhoneFactor in October of 2012. So it's something that, while it's fairly new to Microsoft, it's fairly new to Office 365, it's technology that's been around for a number of years. We have lots of customers using it. And
all right, here it is. So my name is Paul Andrew, and I'm a technical product manager on the Office 365 team, and I work on identity management and network performance in Office 365. And I'm joined today by Sean Bishop. Sean, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a program manager with the Azure Multi-Factor Authentication team. Came to Microsoft a little over a year ago with an acquisition of a company called PhoneFactor, which is what brought the multi-factor authentication technology to Microsoft, and happy to be here.
All right, so thank you, Sean. So today we're going to be talking about multi-factor authentication and how you can use that in Office 365. There's three parts to the talk, so three topics that we'll be talking about. First, we'll be introducing you to multi-factor authentication. What is it? Why would you want to use it? Why are people getting involved with it? And then second, how is that usable in Office 365? What have we brought into there? And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the future things that we're doing in Office 365 to better support multi-factor authentication. And then we'll spend some time talking about Microsoft Azure multi-factor authentication and what additional things you can do with different licenses or different software that's available from Microsoft Azure. So if that sounds good, we'll get into it. And we should have a good 15 minutes of time for questions at the end. I've been asked to actually, I have a list of things I have to ask you. If you have questions, please come to the microphones. If you have a cell phone, please set it to stun. And at the end, if I don't show you a QR code, please remind me, because you need to give us evals and give us feedback about whether you'd like us to come back or not. Is that it? Yep. There's free stuff. 365, you get to add users into that directory, and you get to manage those users. And you, if you're the organization or representing the organization, you have some kind of subscription or agreement with Microsoft, but your users don't. Your users have an agreement with you, maybe. That's up to you. But your users are under your control. Microsoft does not send them advertising email. We do not have an agreement with your end users. We don't own your data. It's your subscription and your directory. So it's very different to our consumer accounts. And that does mean you can administer them all as a group. You can have a global address list and some things like that. So there's some great benefits there. We avoid commingling the data between these two identity databases. We keep them separated in our data centers, and we make certain service level agreements for the organizational ID, which is the Azure Active Directory, that are different from our consumer accounts. So that's why we have these two directories. Sometimes that's inconvenient when you're actually signing in and you have to remember which identity you're using here or there. And we're working to improve that in the different properties that we have that use these identity systems. One example of that is if you have an Azure subscription, you can sign into the Azure portal with either a Microsoft account or an organizational ID. So that's a great example of how we're making that easier for people to work with these two directories that we have. So we have two directories. Today we're talking about the one on the right, the one in orange. The one in blue also has multi-factor authentication system, but it's different from what we'll be talking about today. Today is all about the organizational IDs. The second, the other introductory slide that I wanted to talk about is Office 365 and how it has 3 different identity models. And as a subscriber to Office 365, you can choose which or a mixture of these that you use. The first is